What's Going On with Artur Beterbiev. Once the feared powerhouse of 175 pounds, he's now coming off his first professional loss, a 12-round decision to Dmitry Bivol that stripped him of his undisputed titles. At 40, the aura of invincibility has cracked, and questions loom. Is he evolving or overthinking? With the Bivol trilogy on hold, his November fight with Dion Nicholson could define the final chapter of his career.
So what has happened to Beterbiev? What has happened to Beterbiev? I mean, the media has just become really silent. Beterbiev is silent. The boxing purists are silent. I mean, what's going on? There was so much talk beforehand about his domination, so much talk about the power. I'm just wondering, why is everyone silent? Now, of course, in February 2025, Beterbiev lost a majority decision to Dmitry Bivol in their rematch. It was his first loss, but it was a tremendous fight. And he actually went 12 rounds, which is significant because it's just rare for him to go the distance. Has he ever been the distance before, or has he knocked out everyone? But in that fight, he made adjustments, and he made good adjustments. But then Bivol made even greater adjustments and went into what I call matrix mode. And what's surprising, or maybe it's not surprising, but the trilogy between Beterbiev and Bivol has been put on ice. And actually, Beterbiev has announced that he will fight Dion Nicholson on November the 22nd. So that means, by default, the trilogy is on hold, and Beterbiev has publicly blamed Bivol, stating his camp are avoiding the third fight. So it appears that maybe there's some promotional politics to be involved, but there may be some economic implications here as well, because I believe that the pay-per-view economically wasn't a success. Now, culturally, or to the boxing purist, it was a success. It was a tremendous fight, but I believe it didn't do great numbers. And maybe there was a greater expectation with regards to the numbers. However, there's been some other interesting developments, like in some recent training footage, Beterbiev was seen punching from a southpaw stance, which is unusual because he's an orthodox fighter. So he mostly fights from, his left hand here and his left foot forward. But it appears that he's making some tactical shifts. And this could be maybe part of his evolution. And it may suggest that he's working on adaptability by mixing stances or disguising attacks, or maybe he's trying to be less predictable. However, when I look at that, I think to myself, if Beterbiev is trying to be too technical, would this negatively affect him? Because it might not be a positive thing, because in the trilogy, if it does happen, surely he would want it to be a fight, not a technical match. If he goes into the trilogy and tries to have a technical boxing match with Bivol, surely that's playing into Bivol's hands. But there's also another possibility. Maybe this is mind games. But I'm not saying that implementing adaptability and maybe punching from different angles is a bad thing. I'm saying trying to go into the trilogy with the mindset of making it a technical fight would not be beneficial for his identity. There's also some other questions and some other things to consider. Now, Beterbiev is 40, so that means within the boxing context, he is no longer a younger fighter. And this loss, some could say, could signal that he's starting to slow down. Now, I'm not sure about that, because I just think that Bivol was exceptional. Beterbiev was good. He's always good. But Bivol was exceptional. And that was the difference. Now, when we talk about age in boxing, generally speaking, getting older in boxing is not going to be good. Why is that? Because it will affect your speed, and it will affect your reflexes, and it will affect your feet. And all of those things are very, very crucial in boxing. However, we do have some references. For example, when we look at Bernard Hopkins. Bernard Hopkins seemed to get better with age. But there's a distinction here. Bernard Hopkins was an intelligent fighter. He wasn't a powerhouse. He used intelligent tactics to disarm his opponents. Then we have the George Foreman reference. In his second career, he made changes to be effective. He still punched incredibly hard, but he increased his accuracy, awareness, and he increased his boxing intelligence. He set traps. He walked his opponents into punches. So these are two references where age hasn't hindered the performance of a fighter. But I do feel that Beterbiev's style of immense power and immense pressure, age could hinder. It could hinder him. Of course it could. And then there's the other element about the evolution in sports nutrition and the evolution in sports exercise. Can that prolong a boxer's career? Is 40 the new 30? It's really hard to qualify. Then you've got the genetics of the individual. Some people are just built differently. They can have longer careers. There's many variables to this, and there's no easy answer. And I believe Teddy Atlas stated that the ring is the chamber of truth. And I guess we're only going to get the answer to these questions when Beterbiev enters the chamber of truth again. The Nicholson fight, of course, could be critical. A strong showing, a dominant win. It may reopen doors to big fights. And these big fights could be with Benavidez, rematch with Yard, or that trilogy with Bivol. The risk, though, because every action can have a potential positive or negative reaction, the risk is that misstep, which could punish him from further elite title contention. So I guess there's some questions to ask here. And one of the questions is, how did that rematch with Bivol affect Beterbiev, not just physically, but did it affect him mentally? Should he change his fighting identity due to the loss, or should he maintain his fighting identity? And what adjustments could Bivol make to be triumphant in the trilogy? That's a good question. What adjustments would he need to make to increase the likelihood of being victorious? And if he does make those adjustments, because Bivol's an intelligent fighter, he will make adjustments on the adjustments, and then will Bivol be able to make those further adjustments? Also, is well, it's not a decision, is it? But is the fact that the trilogy being delayed a strategic move, or is it just the impact of certain promotional issues? And does Beterbiev fighting Dion Nicholson, does that tell us something about Beterbiev's confidence? And does it tell us something about his positioning in the division? And what's behind that new strategy of training southpaw? Is it just a random video, or is it a real strategic shift? And how long more does Beterbiev have? How much more does he have? And these are some interesting questions, because Beterbiev is still an elite fighter and a very powerful puncher. A very powerful puncher. He was brutalizing everyone. And I guess the other thing is, psychologically, does this change the dynamic? Because when you fight Beterbiev, that must do something to a fighter psychologically, in terms of, you're thinking, how hard does he hit? And, what do I have to do? It must be an psychological experience to fight him. But does that change does that change because of what happened with the rematch with Bivol? So there's some interesting developments here, but hopefully the silence will stop.